Tell me how to sing my song. Tell me how to sing my song. Yeah.
Hello, welcome to Solution-Based News. I'm your host, Nora Costley, and today's episode is How to Help Immigrants and Address the Border Crisis. We have a panel of 4 activists, community organizers, and an attorney who are going to help us look at solutions to this international crisis. Here to my right is Catherine Foster, who is an immigrant rights activist and the ORD2 Indivisible on the ORD2 Indivisible Steering Committee. What is Indivisible's goal, and how is that connected with our agenda here today to practice tolerance?
Thanks for inviting me, Nora. It's a privilege to be on this panel.
Thank you for coming.
Sure. Indivisible is a grassroots organization that sprang up after Trump was elected, and its aims are to elect progressive officials, restore our democracy, and defeat the Trump agenda. So there are many aspects of the Trump agenda that we're fighting. But at the top of the list is the cruelty of this administration in how it treats people who are lawfully seeking asylum. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we are horrified at the attempts to stop people at the border, separating children from their families, and the horrific conditions that people are held in. So one of the things that Indivisible does is it holds rallies, and we've had a number of rallies on the issue of immigration, and sometimes we've partnered with Unite and Unite Oregon. We also make a lot of phone calls to our members of Congress, Senators Wyden and Merkley and Representative Walden. And Indivisible members call them all the time, expressing their displeasure with the administration's harsh actions and policies.
Wow. Well, thank you for so much for all that work that you're doing.
Sure.
And thank you for being here. And now introducing immigration attorney and second-generation Mexican immigrant, John Almaguer.
Hi, thanks for having me.
When did your parents achieve citizenship, and how long did it take them?
Well, my parents came in the 60s, and as they were both graduates from medical school, my father is a doctor and my mother was a nurse, there was a need, and so they came into this country as residents. My father, as a matter of fact, was drafted into the Air Force, where he served as a captain during Vietnam, but in San Bernardino, California, where I was born. They didn't get their naturalization, become U.S. citizens, until I was in law school. And so when they were going through their process, it was something that I found interesting. And being a Latino, I felt compelled to learn about the process and what they were doing. So yeah, my family's history did encourage me to learn about immigration law and see how I could help other people.
And they wanted to hold on to their privileges as Mexican citizens for a while? Is that what
When you became a U.S. citizen, for countries will determine whether you give up your naturalization in that country. And Mexico at the time, if you became a U.S. citizen, you lost your legal status in Mexico, so you could have owned property and things of that nature. So when those laws became less strict, that's when my parents decided that it was time for them to naturalize. And so
it just happened to be when you were in law school.
It was fortuitous, I think, for some, and maybe not for others.
Yeah. To my left, we have Bianca, Marcella Ballara, activist, community organizer for Beyond Toxics. Did I say that right?
You said my name right, yeah.
Okay, awesome. As a child of Cuban immigrants, you believe what we lack in privilege we make up for in knowledge or importance of family and land's integrity. In your speech at the March to End Human Detention, you spoke about rural areas being less inviting for marginalized citizens, like the Rogue Valley that we live in, and in more nature rich areas being less accessible for marginalized communities like immigrants. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
I would love to. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you for coming.
And I'm really honored to be at this round table with other champions for human rights in the Rogue Valley. It means so much. Thank you for all of your work. I would love to talk about how rural America and rural Southern Oregon in particular, where we live, could be a more inviting and welcoming place for the immigrant community as well as communities of color. And a lot of it really has to do with some statistics. According to the USDA in a recent report called Who Owns the Land, 98% of the land in America is owned by white Americans. And another statistic is that approximately 70% of the people who do farm work, so do seasonal migrant and farm work in this country who work the land, are people of color, especially Latinx community. So right away you have a picture of who it is that owns the land in this country and who works the land.
Wow.
So that's rural America in a nutshell. And I think that already kind of sets up why it is that there's an unequal power structure and situation when it comes to living rurally.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, and then other reasons involve unequal wealth distribution in this country. So white Americans in general have the inherited wealth and the assets and the access to wealth and assets to own land, whereas people of color who maybe have a longer time in this country as well as have less or unequal opportunities to wealth and to job opportunities, don't have the same assets to buy and own land. So they tend to cluster in cities. And don't have the same opportunity to buy land and to have the great American dream of, several acres and a farm and growing your own food. But a lot of it also has to do with cultures of safety.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. Yeah, safety.
Absolutely.
Not feeling safe.
Yeah, because there's so many such a preponderance of the white community in rural America, and there's also huge KKK history, and also histories of just white supremacist culture, right-wing conservative culture. Communities of color tend to cluster with their own kind in cities where there's also, there tend to be more universities, higher degrees of education, more progressive politics. So they provide safe havens, as well as more job opportunities as well.
Right,
Yeah.
more diversity.
And more diversity, exactly. So it has a lot to do with wealth. It has a lot to do with inability to buy and own land in this country so far, and it has a lot to do with feelings of safety. And it'd be great for all of those things to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Nick, immigration rights activist and the first environmental justice organizer for UNITE. Thank you for joining us here tonight.
That's good to be here.
Or today, rather. It feels like night in here. What kind of work does UNITE do?
Well, UNITE does a variety of work with various members of our community. We do work with getting people registered to vote. We do work with the state legislature to try and pass bills and reforms that will improve lives for immigrants and also other people throughout the state. We work with local representatives as well. We talk with them about issues that are going on and affecting the community. We also work with Medford Police and the Jackson County Sheriffs to try and help them to improve policies or how they might interact with Latinos or other people in our community so that everyone feels more comfortable working with them and helping to keep our communities safe. We also do a lot of work to help get out the vote for the Latino community. We help them as well with other issues and also the general community in large because we help to register people for the Oregon Health Plan so they can get health insurance if they're low income. That's something we've just started doing in the past few years. We got a grant and we have a worker, his name's Christian, who helps sign people up onto OHP, and that's been very successful, I think.
Have you guys found here, because I know in other areas of the country that like minorities and marginalized communities can have a harder time voting due to different policies? Do you guys find that here?
Well, one nice thing about Oregon is we use the mail-in ballot system.
Yeah.
So it makes it a lot easier for
Right.
people who might have long working jobs where they can't necessarily just come in to a voting center to cast a ballot. So having our different voting system here in Oregon is a real benefit, I feel, to a lot of people, not just immigrants, but also people who are elderly who may have trouble moving in their homes. It's much easier for them to vote there than it would be to have to drive, especially because some people don't feel comfortable driving at night once they become older. So being able to just vote in their home and mail it in is an easier way, I think, for people to participate in our democracy.
Yeah, I do like it personally, for sure. How does the environmental justice work tie into border relief and immigrant aid?
Well, a good number of immigrants who come to the United States work in agriculture, as Bianca previously mentioned. And what I largely do at UNITE in regards to the environmental aspects is to try and reduce exposure to pesticides for agricultural workers, because a lot of immigrants work in agriculture and can become sick or develop cancer down the road due to extreme exposure to various pesticides. That's largely how we have environmental justice play in, but there are some other aspects as well that affect how people live, and also just in their homes, being exposed to pesticide for your children or for your other family members who live with you can be a real problem, especially because most pesticides tend to stick to the work clothes and the boots and the skin, of course, of the farm workers or other day laborers who are out in the fields. And so once they come home, they have to do special things, such as put whatever clothes they're carrying in a special basket so they can be washed separately. And they also need to try and wash themselves to reduce their own exposure to these potentially dangerous chemicals. And so there's just a lot of ways that environmental organizing impacts the immigrant community, but the way that I focus on a lot at UNITE is through this exposure via pesticides while working.
Thank you. And that brings us to the next question, Bianca. Maps like the one currently released by the Environmental Health Alliance clearly illuminates that minorities reside much closer proximity to hazardous emissions. How does your work with environmental organization tie into immigrant aid and border relief?
Similar to, as Nick was describing, our work with environmental justice at Beyond Toxics, we focus on clean air and clean water for everyone, regardless of race, class, gender, or any privilege or power. And what we've really noticed is that immigrant communities and communities of color and low-income communities tend to have the least access to clean air, clean water. And so we don't work directly with the border and the border crisis, but once people do come, they immigrate here, they seek refuge, they tend to be then pushed out into the lower income parts of cities. Which are also the industrial zones, and then they tend to work in those industrial zones too, as well as agriculture.
Yeah.
And so you have people working in the most toxic parts of our industry and economy, as well as living in those toxic areas too. So they just experience greater pollutants, chemicals, pesticides at home and in the workplace, and also groundwater contamination, so air and water. And so we advocate on behalf of communities. More of our work is focusing on climate refugees and immigrants, since they are, in a way, the canaries in the coal mine. They are the ones who are really pushed to the outskirts where these manufacturing plants are, where these chemicals and toxins that are affecting all of us, but really affecting them on the front line.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Catherine, since June, a lot has changed at the Mexican border, and due to tightening up at the Guatemalan border as well. And so different countries are getting affected. Originally, you worked for the San Diego Rapid Response Network. What has changed to make this a less valuable way for people to help, and what is a better suggestion?
Well, in January, I went down to the San Diego area to work for the San Diego Rapid Response Network. And, excuse me, the situation at the time was very different. People seeking asylum, once they had gone through part of the hurdles that the process puts them through and were able to come to the United States and be with their sponsors until their hearing date, which could be a year later, happened. So there was a process whereby they would go through some of the steps. They would be bused by ICE up to the San Diego area, and they'd arrive at this shelter, and that's where I worked. The shelter was operated by the Jewish Family Services, and 100 people a day would come through, maybe more. I was only there for a couple of days. And they would do intake interviews with them. They would, volunteers would contact their sponsors and make travel arrangements and then take them to the bus or the plane so they could go to their sponsors. This shelter also provided, it had great big dorm rooms and a big kitchen, lots of meals, donated clothes, a medical clinic, childcare. And what I was doing down there, because my Spanish was not good enough to do the intake interviews, was I was photocopying documents and working in the kitchen. So back then they needed a lot of volunteers because floods of people were coming through. But with the Remain in Mexico policy that has come into effect, the spigot has stopped, kind of slowed down. And so they don't need as many volunteers as they used to, but they do need volunteers. It's just that you can't say, oh, can a group of 6 of us come in February for a week, because they don't know what the situation will be like in February. So it's harder for people from far away to volunteer, but it is not impossible. Yeah.
And you suggested, since that isn't, the spigot is closed, as you said, for that, the World Central Kitchen, if people wanted to go help at the border, is a good way.
Right.
Yeah.
World Central Kitchen is in Tijuana. I did not volunteer there, but they are kind of a pop-up kitchen that goes to disaster areas. They went to Puerto Rico, and they serve 3,000 meals a day. So they have a great need for people who can chop vegetables and wash pots and pans, and you don't need Spanish for that.
Okay.
And there's one other group that people could help out. While I was down in San Diego in January, I worked with a woman, a powerhouse named Bertie Gutierrez, who has started a Facebook group called Bridge of Love Across the Border. And I think the graphic is going to say bridges, but it is bridge singular. It's a Facebook group. And she collects donations of clothing, baby supplies, anything that people who are now stuck in the shelters in Tijuana might need. And she's got a great network. And so what I did when I helped her was we opened up a whole storage unit full of bags of clothing and resorted them into men's, women's, and children. Got it all organized, and she was deeply grateful because she basically works by herself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you so much for going there and doing that. Thank you for that. All right. Well, John, do you know how many undocumented immigrants are currently living in the U.S. right now?
Well, the best figures we have are from 2017. This is from the Pew Center and several government studies. And so in the United States in total, we have about 34 million lawful immigrants in this country, which also include about roughly 1 million DACA recipients. Unauthorized it's harder to gauge, but the census or the consensus is it's about 10.5 million unauthorized immigrants living in the United States. Now, what's interesting is a lot of times this administration and other people tend to conflate undocumented with Mexican. So when people talk undocumented, they're talking Mexican undocumented people. That figure is only 4.9 million, which is down from their high in 2007 of 6.9 million. So what we're seeing is that over the course of years, for a number of reasons, Mexican immigration has slowed down tremendously.
Yeah.
And there's actually more people leaving the United States for a variety of reasons versus entering. Also, it's not because border security is stricter. There's less apprehensions of Mexican nationals in 2017. So less people are trying to come into the United States. Now,
Because
the
it's
figure,
better for them where they are.
not necessarily better, but probably it's a variety of reasons. One is they're treated better in their home country, so why
Right.
would you come somewhere where you're seeing images of people being locked up? You know, there is some growth in the economy in Mexico. So for a variety of reasons, we're seeing that number come down. And in the state of Oregon, we're seeing the same thing. As the undocumented, as a complete population, in 2007, we had 150,000 undocumented people living in this state. That's down to 100,000 in 2017. So we are seeing numbers going down. What we are seeing is, for the first time since 65, we're seeing that Mexicans are making up less than half of the undocumented population. We're seeing more numbers coming in from Asian countries. We're also seeing less people coming in illegally, more people overstaying visas. So they're coming in on perhaps tourist visas, student visas, worker visas, and not leaving. So this myth of open borders, porous borders, and Mexicans running amok in the United States goes contrary to the reality.
Thank you. And you started focusing on family-based naturalization.
Family-based immigration is, there's different ways one could immigrate to the United States. There's diversity visa. There is employment-based, so you're coming in because an employer needs a worker in a certain field. You could come in through asylum, whether it be political or otherwise. And you could come in through family. There's an investment visa, what we used to call the $1 million visa. And that's Jared Kushner and his family came under fire for that when they were offering opportunities in China for investors into their building to get investor visas. But family-based immigration has accounted for up to 2/3 of all lawful immigration into this country. And so the thrust of immigration policy in this country since 1965 has been the reunification of families. And so it's something I deeply believe in. And having started off as a nonprofit attorney with Catholic Charities for a number of years, this was the population that we serviced. And it stayed with me. And in over 20 years of practice in this valley, I've never had to leave the family-based immigration practice. I do naturalization DACA, but still the main thrust of my practice is family-based immigration.
And it seems like the president is trying to do more of a merit-based system than family-based. It's like dependent on income, education, skills.
It's he has championed getting rid of the employment-based, getting rid of diversity visas, getting rid of the family-based. Family-based, he wants to keep solely a spouse and minor children single of U.S. citizens or residents. So he would lop off parents of U.S. citizens, and they've been considered immediate relatives since '65. So he would like to reduce family-based immigration to less than a third of all lawful immigration into this country. Another manner he's trying to completely dilute the current immigration laws is that he's introducing through the public charge test, which has been held right now by courts. But with the public charge, there's an aspect of the process where you have to show that you will not be reliant on the government for support. There's been a recent attempt to expand that definition, but also say if you fall within that definition of a possible public charge, that they would go to a totality of the circumstances test. So they would look at a number of factors, including age, education, health, family size, English proficiency. So it smacks of the criteria for the merit-based system that he was championing. So basically what he's been able to do, or he's trying to do, is embed into the family-based system his merit-based system.
Yeah.
And so if you don't meet that totality of the circumstances test, you will not be allowed to enter the United States. So those people who are going to be able to come in, even through the family-based, are going to be people who are well off.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why Indivisible's agenda is so important towards this cause, to get him out of office.
Indivisible and many others.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
Many
many
others.
others. And what is the danger of just having this a merit-based system?
Well, if you just have a merit-based system, first of all, when Trump asked why we didn't have more immigrants from, was it Sweden, I believe? Norway, yes. And it was interesting because Western European countries and Nordic countries were saying, we don't want to go to the United States. We have health care here.
Right.
And so what would happen is if you go to this merit-based system, it's essentially a way of shutting down immigration, legal immigration into this country. And that has ramifications for everyone. First of all, in a valley like this, where we're so dependent on agricultural workers, you're going to lose those workers. Second, for everyone, immigration into the United States has helped offset the low birth rate in this country. So what does a low birth rate mean? It means lower people of working age, which is 15 to 64. So the less workers that are in the United States, the less taxpayers are in the United States, the less people contributing to Social Security, and the less people who are here to help our older, me becoming one of them, generations of U.S. citizens. So by shutting down immigration, you're cutting off our future livelihood. And it's not just for agricultural businesses, but it's for everyone in the United States.
Right. Thank you for that. Now I want to talk about the bill, the driver's license bill that got passed, and UNITE's connection to that. Can you tell us about that bill?
All right, so UNITE and a number of other organizations in the state have been working on something like the driver's license bill since 2007, when former Governor Ted Kulongoski signed an executive order that removed all driving privileges from people without the proper legal status in the United States. And so one of the earlier efforts we had to try and get something like the driver's license bill passed became what was known as Measure 88, because there was a campaign by the Oregonians for Immigration Reform, which is an anti-immigrant group, to create a ballot initiative, because previously it had already passed within the state Congress. And so Oregonians for Immigration Reform, while working with Sal Esquivel, one of our former representatives for the state, managed to get it onto the ballot. And Measure 88 had a lot of money coming in because to vote yes on Measure 88 was to approve this change for driving privileges
Right.
for people who had trouble proving that they could meet the Oregon driver's license standard, which was to have your birth certificates and other things. So it would have not only helped people who were immigrants, but it also would have helped people who didn't have current Social Security cards or other things who actually were U.S. citizens. But all the money coming in to combat Measure 88 just spread a lot of lies about what the bill really meant. They were saying things that a person could get on an airplane if they showed their power bill, or that all you have to do is show that you're getting like a phone bill to come into the DMV, and all of a sudden all these immigrants, they're going to be able to get a driver's license. And someone who's born in Oregon, they'll have to do this and that and all these other things. But that was not really what Measure 88 was about. It was only about giving drivers driving privileges. It wasn't really a form of identification
So
to
yeah,
these people.
so UNITE, it helped get that passed. That was on UNITE's agenda.
Right.
Correct?
So
Right.
the driver's license bill that recently passed actually was through the state Congress. We and many other people throughout the state, such as PECUN, and the Farm Worker Union, and also CAUSA, worked quite diligently to help get our representatives to vote yes on this. It was thankful it managed to pass because it was actually during the walkout by I believe the 12 Republican representatives and senators for the state of Oregon, who thankfully came back with enough time to actually vote on the measure and get it passed.
Beautiful. That's super helpful for people here. And does anyone know what that means for voting rights with a driver's license?
Well, absolutely nothing for voting rights,
Okay.
because to be able to drive in the state of Oregon does not give you the ability to vote. Only U.S. citizens can vote in this country.
Okay.
So what the driving bill does is it helps our economy. It makes everyone safer because everyone on the road is going to know the rules of the law and the rules of the road and have insurance. But as far as voting, no, there's no ability to vote. The voting card is going to look different from the driver, or the driver's card is going to be very different from the driver's license. So you will visually be able to tell the difference. So all the myth about doing this legitimizes someone's unlawful status. Quite honestly, if I'm law enforcement, I'm looking down at a driver's card, I'm figuring out that there's a good chance that you're undocumented if you have this card. So anyone that would be fooled into letting someone vote with a driver's card would have to be pretty tired.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
So how would someone get involved with UNITE if they wanted to?
Well,
Would this be a good avenue?
Yes, there are a lot of ways to get involved with UNITE. Some of the best ways are just to reach out to us, either via calling us or looking us up online, UNETE. And also you can contact us via our email, uneteoregon@gmail.com. We have plenty of volunteer opportunities. Other ways people can help with UNITE is via a little coalition we have with Beyond Toxics and NAACP here in the state of Oregon called Local, and we're working to address certain environmental issues that affect people throughout the state, not just, we're primarily a people of color group, but we also want to tackle environmental issues that affect everyone in our state. Another way you can help is we have English classes and citizenship classes that we give for free to people who want them. And if people would like to be teachers to help with that, help teach English of all levels, you don't necessarily have to be able to speak Spanish. It can be helpful, but we have all level of people wanting to come in to improve their English. So anyone's welcome to come and help with that. We have just a variety of ways.
And that's a great way to help in the valley. And if you want to help at the border, you went down with Al Ultralato. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how one might help through that organization?
Sure. In May, I went down to Tijuana, and worked with Al Otro Lado, which is a binational legal services organization. And the main thing they do is they provide a free legal clinic for asylum seekers that explains the intricacies of the asylum process. And they also provide, they have a medical clinic, they provide some food, there's childcare, and the people who come to the clinic have the opportunity to have an intake interview and talk to an immigration attorney. So I did that for 5 days. People were, I thought that most of the people that I would be encountering would be from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, because those were the countries that you heard about in the initial caravan. But the situation has changed. It's people from all over the world. There were a lot of people from Haiti. I met a man from Cameroon. I have heard of people from Azerbaijan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Venezuela, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and
So there's people from all over.
yes, there's people
coming
from
in
all.
and-
It's a
yeah.
global
Yeah,
refugee
it's a global-
crisis.
Wow.
And they're all like stuck in
Yeah.
Tijuana at this point.
So that's a good place to go do relief work with this organization, at least.
Yes. Now, my Spanish was not strong enough to conduct some of the interviews, so I did childcare. And they had a very well-stocked children's area with games, toys, coloring books, children's books. And at one point, I found a little plush, I don't know, toy or something, and I threw it at one kid, and he kind of, like, what's going on? And then he got it, and he threw it back, and then everybody else is going, what's going on? So we had a 5-person thing going, and their faces all lit up.
Yeah.
And it was so wonderful to see them have these moments of joy after living in shelters, coming all this way.
Wow.
Meanwhile, one of the reasons they have the separate children's area is so that the kids can have that break. But it's also because their parents on the other side of the room are doing their interviews with the volunteers, and they're telling the terrible stories of what started them on their journey, and they don't want their kids to hear.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. This might be a good avenue for someone who can speak Spanish to go
Yes.
to Tijuana and do some border relief.
Well, the main thing that you can bring to all of this volunteer work, the thing that they most need is people who can speak Spanish. But also, because of the influx of refugees from all over the world, they need people who can speak French, Portuguese, Creole, big need for Creole because lots of Haitians are coming in. People who can speak indigenous languages of Guatemala, the people who can speak the languages of Eritrea and Ethiopia. And so if you have language ability and a little bit of time and want to volunteer, they can use your help. They also can use your help remotely for translation purposes. So
Thank you so much.
yeah.
John, so you said that your main goal is to keep legal avenues open in order to keep it from being just like, what were the words you said? A border, like, run, or
Oh, yes.
sprint,
Okay.
or something like that. Right? What did you say? Something.
Yeah.
To just keep it from having a lot of people trying to cross illegally. And so that's your mission. And how could our viewers help assist in that mission that you have?
There's a number of ways people could help. You could help educate, get educated. For instance, on November 1st, I'll be giving a lecture on U.S. immigration policy and law talking about immigration being a global issue. So when you're talking about people coming in from different parts of Latin America or different parts of the world into the US, that's happening everywhere in the world. Immigration ultimately is a have versus the have-nots. So this is a global phenomena that we're seeing. So people need to educate themselves on that if they're interested in this. I think also another way that people can help is by being a good neighbor, by voting. Voting is so essential. We can't undersell the importance of voting. We're here because a lot of people were disgruntled in the US system and figured things couldn't get any worse, and they didn't see a difference between the two candidates we have. Well, we're seeing it. We're seeing it. Those of us who knew his stances on certain issues knew what was coming up, and it's playing out even worse than we imagined. But I think more important, I'd like to ask for people to be that agent of change. It's important to hear stories. It's important to have that good cleansing cry. But let your compassion guide you into action. Do something, whether your help be financial, sharing your talents, or simply voting your conscience. We need your help to change this tide. With you and your help, we could once again become the beacon of hope that the United States has always been.
And can we get the graphic for John's event? Can we pull that graphic up? Right, thank you. And what else can people do? This is for the panel, to people who have different skill sets, people coming with money, without money, people who might have a lot of time, or, so what is the best thing, you guys, the best advice you can give for people who want to help?
I would love to answer that, in terms of just like things that people can do. Started off with be a good neighbor, recognize that immigrants are all over this country, all over our community. And in fact, unless you're indigenous to this continent, you and your ancestors are immigrants. So, but immigrants in terms of like undocumented folks who are here currently or here trying to get here currently, they're our neighbors, we're family. And so just have compassion. Do what you can to advocate for them. Recognize that they don't have legal representation. They don't get to speak their voice the way that those who have U.S. citizenship do. So advocate for them at work and at the rental market are like really easy, everyday sort of ways to advocate for them. They tend to be abused in the workplace and not receive equal wages. And they also tend to have a harder time finding rentals. So just have that in mind. And when you can, speak up to them, to whoever's in charge of your work situation. That's one idea.
There's a group called Legal Services Fund that helps people who are trying to reapply for DACA, because applying for DACA is not free. It costs roughly $500 every 2 years, and right now their fund is dried up. So if you'd like to help them by donating some money, it doesn't have to be all 500, but anything helps, so they can get people to be able to reapply to keep their status and stay in the country via DACA. Another thing people can do is with UNITE, we have a donation page where you can, when you donate, indicate what you want the money to go to. So you can indicate you want to go to the border or to asylum or to some other way to help people, and we can send that money to those specific groups who are at the border or who help with asylum specifically to help keep that funded and to give those services.
The groups I mentioned all have donate buttons, and they also have Amazon wish lists, which people can donate to. The San Diego Rapid Response Network has a great need for people to step forward and be sponsors for asylum seekers who do not have a point of contact in the U.S. That's a 6-month commitment.
And there's also been suggestions like you can, I read in the article you referenced in your speech how to help, 20 ways to help immigrants. You can do things like donate your frequent flyer miles.
Yeah,
some of the other things she
other
mentioned?
things is, it depends on your comfort level. There are certain things where you can lend out a room in your house,
Right.
where you could help sponsor someone who is in removal proceedings. So there are a variety of different ways that you could help. There's ways that you could help nationally. There's ways that you could help locally. UNITE, Unite Oregon, Northwest Seasonal Workers are just some that come to mind. Nonprofit Legal Services. There's different ways that we can incorporate your talents and your gifts because it's needed. We're carrying a heavy load, and it gets lonely and tiresome sometimes. So we always welcome the support. Thank you.
And at the end, we're going to post a graphic that has all the websites connecting you to all the different organizations that we talked about today. For those of you who are called to action, is there anything else like pressing that you guys want to make sure you say to people who want to help?
I want to underline the importance of supporting these local organizations that support our local immigrant communities, because once people get here, helping at the border is extremely important, as well as voting, registering to vote, and then voting for just and fair immigration reform in 2020, as well as progressive politics overall, is extremely important. But once immigrants actually get here, they need to be connected to resources, support, mental health services for all the trauma that they and their families have gone through, English classes, U.S. citizenship classes. So I think it's really important to underline that there is no better way to support than supporting the immigrants in our community with these organizations. If you have money, giving monthly and on a sustainable long-term basis is way more advantageous than just giving once, recognizing that it's a long road for immigrants.
All right.
Yeah.
And I would just like to add, going off of that, yes, what's happening on the border is tragic, and we need to put a stop to that. That's the image we're having of our country, of our values put out to the world. But I also want to say that as Bianca's saying, let's not forget the 10.5 million people in this country right now. And it's easy to say it's an us versus them, but for years I've been saying them are us. And what I mean by that is there's 2.3 million families in the United States that are mixed status families. Mixed status families means that they're families that contain various combinations of citizens, lawful permanent residents, and people without status. So these are American families. So I have been busy for 20 years just doing family-based immigration law, which means that the people that are coming to me are American families. So when we're talking about deporting people, when we're talking about harsh penalties, let's realize that we're impacting American families. So that's the one thing I'd like to drive home.
And I would like to end by saying, if you want to affect change at the top levels, join ORD2 Indivisible and help us create positive change.
Right, because the president is kind of a driving force in this whole scenario, so removing the president is pretty key to ending it. All right, well, thank you guys so much for all the work that you do in coming here and sharing for other people who want to participate in just this civil justice movement. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for watching.
Just another man in this battle for human existence. Another statistic in these days of ballistic characteristic. I think we missed it, the chance to gut the gluttonous kings. We act the hooks on our mouths until our faces go green. Another obscene scene, another scheme, another spleen, ordered by the New World King. Another green-eyed monster, another ringmaster taught to another sleepwalking haunter, a mantra of ignorance. The belligerent kings of war, turning America into an imperial land whore. You tell me where I'm going. Who are you? Tell me I'm doing wrong. Who are you? Tell me how I'm living is a sin. Who are you? Tell me how to sing.